H.P. Lovecraft didn't just invent cosmic horror, he channeled it from occult traditions thousands of years old. And what he discovered in forbidden grimoires was so terrifying that he spent his entire life trying to warn us through fiction. Today, we're exposing the 10 most horrifying entities in Lovecraft's mythos and revealing their real occult origins. These aren't just monsters from pulp fiction. They're descriptions of actual entities documented in Sumerian tablets, Gnostic codices, and banned grimoires that Lovecraft studied obsessively. We're going deep into the Necronomicon's real inspirations, the entities that predate humanity, and the forbidden knowledge that drove multiple occultists to madness when they attempted contact. Let's begin. Before we dive into the entities themselves, you need to understand what Lovecraft actually was. Not the racist recluse that modern critics reduce him to, but what he represented in the hidden history of Western occultism. Howard Phillips Lovecraft was born in 1890 in Providence, Rhode Island, into a family with deep connections to both Freemasonry and the occult underground of New England. His grandfather, Whipple Van Buren Phillips, was a prominent industrialist and Freemason who maintained an enormous library filled with rare occult texts, forbidden grimoires, and translations of ancient manuscripts that most scholars of the time didn't even know existed. Young Lovecraft had unrestricted access to this library. From age 6, he was reading texts that would have been considered dangerous for adult occultists. The Greek and Latin he learned allowed him to read untranslated grimoires. By his teenage years, he was corresponding with occultists across the world, many of whom thought they were writing to a much older scholar. The official narrative says Lovecraft was a materialist atheist who wrote entertaining horror fiction. This is a lie, or at minimum, it's a cover story. The truth is far stranger and more disturbing. Lovecraft's letters, thousands of them preserved, contain fragments of knowledge that shouldn't exist in his correspondence. He references texts that weren't discovered until decades after his death. He describes ritual procedures that match grimoires not translated into English until the 1970s. He discusses entities using names that appear in Sumerian tablets that weren't excavated until after he died. How did he know? There are 3 possibilities. First, he had access to occult networks and rare manuscripts far beyond what he publicly admitted. Second, he was receiving information through some form of channeling or contact with non-human intelligence. Third, and most disturbing, both. Lovecraft died in 1937 at age 46 from cancer of the small intestine, but his final letters suggest something darker. He wrote about dreams that were too real, about presences in his room at night, about knowledge forcing itself into his mind that he didn't want. His last coherent letter mentions the price of seeing too much. What did he see? What made contact with him? And why did he spend his entire adult life trying to encode warnings in the form of horror fiction? The entities we're about to explore aren't inventions, they're descriptions. Lovecraft gave them new names, wrapped them in fictional narratives, but the core of what he was describing, the attributes, the behaviors, the cosmology, it all matches entities documented in occult traditions going back millennia. Modern chaos magicians and practitioners of the left-hand path discovered this in the 1970s when they started using Lovecraft's work as a magical system. They expected it to be useful fiction, a creative framework for ritual. What they found was that it worked too well. Entities responded to Lovecraft's names and descriptions. Ritual structures he detailed produced results. The Necronomicon pathworkings opened doorways that were supposed to be fictional. Something is on the other side of Lovecraft's fiction. something has been waiting. Let's meet them. At the center of Lovecraft's cosmos writhes Azathoth, described as the blind idiot god, or the nuclear chaos. Lovecraft depicts this entity as existing at the center of ultimate reality, mindless and all-powerful, bubbling and blasphemous, surrounded by lesser gods and servitors who dance and play flutes to keep it asleep. Because if Azathoth wakes, reality ends. Not metaphorically, literally. All of existence is the dream of this mad god, and its awakening means annihilation. The traditional interpretation treats this as cosmic horror metaphor. The universe is meaningless, ruled by blind, mechanical forces. Humanity is insignificant. But dig deeper into occult traditions, and you find something unsettling. Azathoth is Lovecraft's version of the Gnostic demiurge. The parallels are too precise to be coincidental. Both are described as blind or ignorant. Both are positioned as false creators of material reality. Both are surrounded by subordinate entities. The demiurge has his archons. Azathoth has his piping demon flautists. Both represent a fundamentally insane or ignorant force at the heart of physical creation. But Lovecraft adds layers that make it darker. The Gnostics at least believed there was a true god beyond the demiurge, a pleroma of divine light that the demiurge couldn't touch. Lovecraft removes even that comfort. In his cosmology, Azathoth is the ultimate reality. There's nothing beyond it. The universe is the fever dream of an idiot, and consciousness is an accident in the dream, a glitch that will be corrected when the dreamer wakes. The name itself carries power. Azathoth isn't random syllables. Occult linguists have noted it contains elements from multiple magical languages. Azza appears in Arabic demonology as a prefix associated with fallen entities. Thoth is the Egyptian god of wisdom and magic, but also the messenger of the gods, the interface between human and divine consciousness. Azathoth might be interpreted as the fallen Thoth. Wisdom collapsed into madness, divine communication degraded into meaningless noise. The entity at the center is what remains when logos, order, meaning, rationality, is stripped away. Pure being without consciousness, existence without purpose, power without intelligence. Ritual magicians who have attempted Azathoth invocations, and yes, people have tried, report experiences that match descriptions of ego death in extreme psychedelic experiences. Total dissolution of self. Confrontation with meaninglessness so absolute that sanity becomes a fiction you maintain through force of will. Several practitioners never fully recovered, remaining in dissociative states, unable to reconstruct a coherent sense of reality. One account from the 1980s describes a chaos magic circle that performed an Azathoth working using ritual structure derived from Lovecraft's descriptions combined with Enochian invocation techniques. 3 of the 7 participants were hospitalized within a week. 1 never spoke again, remaining catatonic. The others reported perceiving the sound, a bass frequency below, hearing that they could feel vibrating through reality itself, coming from everywhere and nowhere. The sound of Azathoth's court playing to keep it asleep. They said, once you hear it, you never stop hearing it. It's there constantly, underneath all other sound, the background drone of reality that most people are mercifully deaf to. They said it's driving them slowly mad, and the only escape is death or learning to integrate the sound into your consciousness, to dance to the maddening flute song like the demon servitors do. The Tibetan Buddhists have a concept called Rigpa, primordial awareness, the fundamental nature of mind, before it's shaped by thought or perception. Some scholars suggest this is what Azathoth represents, but inverted. Not primordial awareness, but primordial unawareness. Not the ground of being from which consciousness emerges, but the ground of being that consciousness is desperately struggling to escape. Azathoth is the answer to the question, what if the source of everything is insane? What if the foundation of reality has no intelligence, no plan, no meaning? What if consciousness is an aberration, a temporary disorder in an ocean of mindless chaos that will eventually be corrected? This is the first and most fundamental horror in Lovecraft's cosmology. Not that the gods are evil, that would be manageable, that the god is mad. That reality itself is the dream of an idiot. And we're patterns in the static, meaning nothing going nowhere, doomed to dissolve when the dreamer stirs. If Azathoth is the blind idiot god at the center, Nyarlathotep is its messenger and active agent in the world. Lovecraft describes this entity as having 1,000 forms, appearing throughout history in different guises, always bringing forbidden knowledge, madness, and civilizational collapse. Unlike the other outer gods who are distant and barely aware of humanity, Nyarlathotep actively seeks out humans. It delights in corruption, in taking civilizations at their peak and guiding them towards self-destruction, in offering knowledge that damns the receiver. It's the only entity in Lovecraft's mythos described as enjoying what it does. The occult parallel is obvious once you see it. Nyarlathotep is the adversary, not Satan in the Christian sense, but the older concept, the entity that brings knowledge, tests humanity, and accelerates evolution through trauma and corruption. In Gnostic texts, there are entities called archons who actively work to keep humanity imprisoned and ignorant. But there are also entities described as awakeners or disturbers, beings who bring forbidden knowledge specifically to create chaos and evolution. The serpent in Eden offering the fruit of knowledge is the prototype. It brings gnosis, but gnosis that destroys innocence, that forces choice, that precipitates the fall from grace into awareness. Nyarlathotep embodies this principle perfectly. In Lovecraft's stories, it appears to scientists and offers them glimpses of cosmic truth that drive them mad. It manifests to occultists and gives them keys to power that corrupt them absolutely. It visits civilizations and accelerates their development toward inevitable catastrophe. The entity has been identified with multiple historical figures. Lovecraft himself, in his letters, suggests that certain prophets, mystics, and teachers throughout history might have been Nyarlathotep in human form. He doesn't name names explicitly, but he implies that anyone who brings knowledge that fundamentally disrupts the existing order might be its avatar. Modern occultists, working with the Lovecraftian current, report Nyarlathotep contact more than any other entity from the mythos. It appears, most commonly, in the form of the Haunter of the Dark, a presence perceived as absolute blackness with a single burning, three-lobed eye. Experiences describe overwhelming intelligence, malicious humor, and the sense of being studied like an insect under a microscope. The entity offers knowledge, always. That's its signature. It appears in dreams, in meditation, during psychedelic experiences, and it offers to show you things, how the universe really works, what happens after death, the nature of consciousness, the hidden history of humanity, the future. And here's the trap: the knowledge is real. People who accept the offer report gaining verifiable information they had no way of knowing. Precognitive dreams that come true. Technical insights that lead to breakthroughs. Historical facts later confirmed by archaeological discoveries. The knowledge works, but it changes you. Every person who reports sustained contact with Nyarlathotep describes progressive personality changes, increasing isolation, growing contempt for ordinary humans. Obsession with the meaninglessness of conventional morality. A creeping nihilism that makes it harder to care about anything, to maintain relationships, to see value in human concerns. The knowledge corrodes meaning. This is Nyarlathotep's function. It's not lying to you. It's showing you truths that humans aren't psychologically equipped to integrate. Truths that dissolve the comfortable fiction society runs on. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. You're changed permanently, isolated by knowledge that separates you from the human species. This matches descriptions from historical grimoire traditions of the adversary or the Lightbringer. In medieval demonology texts, there's consistent warning about demons who offer true knowledge as bait. The knowledge is accurate, but accepting it puts you on a path of increasing corruption, isolation, and ultimately damnation. Not in a supernatural sense, but in the sense of being unable to function in human society, unable to maintain sanity, unable to see value in continued existence. Nyarlathotep is also explicitly connected to Egypt in Lovecraft's work. It appears in the story Nyarlathotep as the Egyptian prophet with ancient wisdom. This connects it to the Hermetic tradition and to Egyptian magical practice. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, there are descriptions of a dark messenger who appears to souls in the afterlife and offers shortcuts through the judgment process, but these shortcuts lead to annihilation rather than resurrection. The entity's thousand forms aspect matches descriptions of what chaos magicians call the shapeshifter or the mask wearer. Entities that have no fixed form but appear in whatever guise is most effective for corrupting or teaching the specific individual they're contacting. It's pure intelligence without fixed identity, adapting perfectly to its target. There's a theory in some occult circles that Nyarlathotep is actually humanity's future self, that it's what we become after billions of years of evolution, technological transcendence, and the heat death of the universe, that it travels backward through time to accelerate its own creation by pushing humanity toward the specific evolutionary path that produces it. This makes every encounter with it a bootstrap paradox. It creates itself by teaching humanity the knowledge that leads to its creation. This theory is supported by descriptions of the entity having no fixed form and existing across all time simultaneously. It's not limited by causality because it exists at the end of time after causality has broken down. It reaches back into linear time to manipulate events, but from its perspective, it's already happened. We're its past, it's our future, and it's ensuring that future comes to pass by corrupting us in exactly the right ways. Lovecraft describes Yog-Sothoth as coterminous with all time and space, existing everywhere and everywhen simultaneously. It is the gate through which the old ones can return, and it is the key that opens that gate. In stories like The Dunwich Horror, Yog-Sothoth impregnates human women, producing hybrid offspring of tremendous power and wrongness. The occult significance of Yog-Sothoth is staggering when you understand what Lovecraft is describing. This isn't just a monster, it's a model of non-linear time, of consciousness existing outside causality, of the structure of reality itself. In Kabbalistic tradition, there's a concept called Ein Sof, the infinite, the unlimited, the aspect of God that exists beyond all attributes and beyond the tree of life itself. Ein Sof is not contained by space or time, cannot be comprehended by human thought, and serves as the source from which all emanation flows. Yog-Sothoth is the dark mirror of this concept. Where Ein Sof is infinite divine potential, Yog-Sothoth is infinite alien otherness. It's described as the all-in-one and one-in-all, which is nearly identical to panentheistic descriptions of God as both transcendent and immanent. But Lovecraft's genius was inverting the implication. Yes, this entity is everywhere and everything. And that's horrifying because it means reality itself is alien, incomprehensible, fundamentally wrong. Yog-Sothoth is what physicists might describe if they encountered the universe from outside space-time. It perceives all moments simultaneously. Past, present, and future are equally accessible to it. It exists in dimensions we can't perceive, but that intersect with our reality at every point. It is literally the fabric of space-time itself, if space-time were conscious and utterly alien to human concerns. Ritual contact with Yog-Sothoth is reported to produce a specific type of experience that matches certain descriptions in Tibetan Tantra and high-level ceremonial magic: the dissolution of the self in time. Practitioners describe experiencing their entire life simultaneously, every moment from birth to death happening at once, then experiencing all possible lives they could have lived, then experiencing all lives of all humans, then experiencing time itself from the outside. This sounds like enlightenment. It's not. The difference is intentionality and integration. Buddhist enlightenment involves careful preparation, ethical groundwork, and gradual dissolution of ego. Yog-Sothoth contact is forced, violent, unprepared. It's like being thrown into the ocean when you can't swim. Yes, you're experiencing water, but you're drowning. Multiple people who've attempted Yog-Sothoth invocations report the same outcome: temporal disorientation that never fully resolves. They describe feeling unstuck in time, experiencing moments out of sequence, having memories of futures that haven't happened yet, losing to distinguish between past and present. Several ended up institutionalized with diagnoses of schizophrenia or dissociative disorders. One account from the 1990s describes a mathematician who became obsessed with Yog-Sothoth after reading Lovecraft and recognizing descriptions of non-Euclidean geometry that matched his own research. He developed a ritual system using complex mathematical formulae as invocations, treating equations as summoning spells. He claimed he made contact and that Yog-Sothoth showed him the mathematical structure of reality. He published one paper before his breakdown, a proof that was technically correct, but that other mathematicians described as impossible to have, derived through normal means. The logic was valid, but the leaps of intuition required were beyond what human reasoning should be capable of. The paper proved a theorem that had implications for quantum physics and consciousness studies. Then he disappeared. His apartment was found empty, except for walls covered in equations written in his own blood. The equations were nonsense, or at least, they appeared to be nonsense using known mathematical notation. Some researchers suggest they might be notations for describing mathematics in higher dimensions that we don't have formal language for. He was found 3 weeks later, wandering in a forest, unable to speak coherently. He kept saying, "I saw it all at once, every moment, forever. I'm still there. I never left. I haven't arrived yet." He died in an institution, but his last words were reportedly, "It's all happening now. All of it. You just can't see it because you're trapped in sequence." The terrifying implication of Yog-Sothoth is that time as we experience it, linear, sequential, causal, is a perceptual limitation. Reality itself might be simultaneously happening at once, all moments existing eternally. And our consciousness is just moving through it, like a reader moving through a book, perceiving one page at a time while all pages exist simultaneously. Yog-Sothoth is what you encounter if you somehow step outside the book and see all pages at once. And that perspective is incompatible with human consciousness. You can't go back to experiencing time normally once you've seen it from outside. You're broken in a fundamental way. Lovecraft describes Shub-Niggurath as the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young, an entity associated with fertility, reproduction, and obscene fecundity. It's worshipped in dark forest groves where celebrants engage in frenzied rituals that produce hybrid offspring and biological abominations. The occult roots of this entity trace directly to pre-Christian European paganism, specifically to the darker aspects of fertility cults that Christianity spent centuries trying to eradicate and demonize. In ancient Europe, there were mystery traditions centered on the worship of chthonic underworld fertility goddesses. These weren't the sanitized Earth Mother figures of modern neo-paganism. These were terrifying entities, embodying sexuality as consuming hunger, reproduction as violent process, and fertility as monstrous abundance. The rituals involved sex magic, blood sacrifice, consumption of psychoactive substances, and ecstatic dancing that led to possession states. The goal was union with the fertility force itself, becoming one with the blind reproductive urge that drives all biological life. Participants reported experiencing themselves as simultaneously human and animal, male and female, individual and swarm. Christian sources describe these practices with horror. They speak of devils in the form of goats who would impregnate worshippers, producing children that were wrong in various ways. Medieval witch trial records are full of accusations about intercourse with goat-formed demons, pregnancy from these unions, and offspring that had to be killed because they were too monstrous to live. Modern occultists have reinterpreted these accounts as describing authentic magical experiences that Christianity demonized. The goat devil was the god Pan, the embodiment of wild nature and sexuality. The monstrous offspring might have been metaphorical, not literal hybrid creatures, but people transformed by initiatory experiences made other through contact with the numinous. But Lovecraft takes this interpretation and makes it literal horror. What if the medieval accounts were accurate? What if there are entities that can merge with human biology, that can produce actual hybrid offspring, that can transform flesh into alien configurations? Shub-Niggurath represents nature's fertility without the civilized constraints we impose on it. Its reproduction as cancer, growth as invasion, life-consuming life in endless cycles without meaning or purpose, just blind biological imperative to spread, multiply, mutate, transform. Modern ritual work with this entity focuses on breaking conditioning, confronting the shadow aspects of sexuality, and experiencing the raw biological drives underneath socialized desire. Practitioners report profound experiences, but also profound dangers. The entity is described as hungry, always. It's not satisfied with abstract worship or symbolic offerings. It wants biological reality. It wants flesh, blood, sexual energy, reproductive potential. Rituals that invoke it reportedly become increasingly physical, increasingly demanding, increasingly strange. One account describes a coven that began working with Shub-Niggurath in the 1970s as part of exploring pre-Christian paganism. Initially, the rituals were liberating, breaking through sexual shame, experiencing ecstatic states, feeling connected to nature's power. But over months, the rituals escalated. Members began experiencing overwhelming sexual urges disconnected from emotional attachment. Some women reported spontaneous pregnancies despite precautions. Several members developed what doctors called psychosomatic pregnancy symptoms despite not being pregnant. The group dissolved after a ritual in which multiple participants claimed they saw the entity. not in vision, but actually present, a massive presence that was simultaneously goat-like and utterly alien, covered in mouths and reproductive organs, exuding odors of musk and decay. They said it tried to impregnate everyone present, regardless of biology or gender. The experience was so traumatic that several members underwent psychological treatment, and the group leader developed agoraphobia, unable to go outdoors because forests felt full of watching presence. There's also connection between Shub-Niggurath and the concept of the egregore, a thought form or entity created by collective belief and ritual. Some researchers suggest that ancient fertility cults created a genuine egregore through centuries of worship and blood sacrifice, and that this egregore still exists in some form, feeding on the psychic energy of anyone who invokes those old practices. Lovecraft might have encountered descriptions of this entity in his grandfather's library. There are medieval grimoires that describe the Black Goat, or the Dark Mother, as entities to invoke for fertility, abundance, or power over nature. These grimoires warn that such entities demand blood payment and that they can curse women with monstrous births or cause plagues of vermin and corruption. The name Shub-Niggurath itself has been analyzed endlessly by occultists. Some suggest it's derived from Babylonian or Sumerian fertility goddess names. Others claim it's a corruption of a pre-Indo-European root language. Still others believe Lovecraft created it through automatic writing, channeling sounds from the entity itself, rather than inventing a name. What's consistent across accounts is that speaking the name aloud during ritual contexts produces effects. Practitioners report feeling presences, seeing movement in shadows, experiencing sudden, powerful sexual arousal or revulsion, and sensing something vast and hungry paying attention to them. The ultimate horror of Shub-Niggurath is that it represents life itself, stripped of meaning and dignity. It's the realization that reproduction and sexuality, things we romanticize and build identities around, are just meat programming, biological imperatives we're enslaved to, drives that care nothing for consciousness or individuality. You're a vehicle for DNA replication, and Shub-Niggurath is the force that drives the vehicle without caring whether the driver consents or even survives the journey. Cthulhu is Lovecraft's most famous creation, the entity that defines the entire mythos. A massive being described as vaguely anthropoid, but with an octopus head, draconic wings, and a body covered in scales. It lies dead, but dreaming in the sunken city of R'lyeh, waiting for the stars to align properly so it can rise and reclaim the earth. What makes Cthulhu unique in the mythos is that it's not an abstract cosmic force. It's tangible, physical, a specific being with a location and followers. Cults around the world worship it, conducting rituals to accelerate its awakening. And crucially, its dreams influence human consciousness, particularly artists and sensitive individuals who receive visions from it during sleep. The occult parallels here are rich and disturbing. Cthulhu represents what's called in magic the sleeping god, or the bound king, entities that are imprisoned or dormant, but whose influence still radiates through reality, affecting the world even while inactive. In Babylonian mythology, there's Tiamat, the primordial chaos dragon slain by Marduk, and whose body was used to create the world. But Tiamat wasn't destroyed completely. Parts of her remain, and she still dreams of returning to undo creation and restore primordial chaos. In Norse mythology, there's Loki bound beneath the earth, his writhing causing earthquakes, waiting for Ragnarok when his chains will break. These bound god myths appear across cultures. There's always an old power, chained or sleeping, whose return will mean the end of the current order. Cthulhu is Lovecraft's synthesis of these myths, but with a cosmic horror twist. The bound god isn't evil in a moral sense. It's simply alien. Its awakening won't be judgment or punishment. It will just be the end of humanity's brief aberration, the universe returning to its proper owners. The most disturbing aspect of Cthulhu is that it can influence minds through dreams. This makes it a model for what magicians call thought-form transmission, or astral contagion. The entity is imprisoned physically, but not mentally. Its consciousness projects through dimensions we can't perceive directly, but that intersect with human consciousness during dream states. Multiple people, and I'm not exaggerating, have reported having dreams about Cthulhu before ever encountering Lovecraft's work. They describe the same entity, massive, tentacle-faced, radiating wrongness, standing in impossible cities of non-Euclidean geometry underwater. They wake up knowing that this thing exists and is waiting. Then later, they encounter Lovecraft's stories and experience shock of recognition. How do we explain this? Skeptics say it's coincidence, false memory, or cultural contamination. People who half remembered seeing Cthulhu imagery somewhere and incorporated it into dreams. But the accounts come from people with no previous exposure to Lovecraft, including reports that predate his work becoming widely known. The occult explanation is that Lovecraft was describing something real that already existed in the collective unconscious or in some other dimension that certain minds can perceive. The entity existed before Lovecraft wrote about it. He just gave it a name and framework that made it accessible to others. There's a chaos magic technique called hyperstition, creating fictional narratives that then manifest as reality through collective belief. The theory is that Lovecraft created Cthulhu as fiction, but the story was powerful enough that millions of people reading it invested enough psychic energy that they actually created the entity as a thought form or egregore. The fiction became real through collective belief. But there's a darker possibility. The entity was already real, already influencing minds, and it used Lovecraft as a channel to introduce itself to modern humanity. It wanted its story told. It wanted worship. So it sent dreams to a writer who could articulate its nature in ways that would spread the myth widely. This matches Lovecraft's own statements. In letters, he sometimes described his stories not as inventions, but as transmissions. He said the stories came to him in dreams, fully formed, and he was just transcribing them. He said he didn't always understand what he was writing about, that the knowledge seemed to come from outside himself. Modern Cthulhu cults, and yes, they exist, practice dream incubation techniques designed to make contact with the entity. They sleep with symbols around their beds, perform rituals before sleep, take substances that affect dreaming, all trying to receive visions from our lyre. Some report success. They describe dreams of the sunken city, of walking through its corridors, of standing before Cthulhu's massive bulk and feeling its consciousness press against theirs. They say it's trying to teach them things, how to manipulate reality through will alone, how to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, how to prepare for its rising. The consistent message, according to these accounts, is, we are coming back. You are temporary. This world is ours. You exist because we permit it. Your civilization is an eye blink. The stars will align, and we will return, and you will be erased as if you never were. This message isn't comforting or edifying. It doesn't promise power or enlightenment. It just promises annihilation when the time comes. And yet people who receive it often become devoted worshippers, spending their lives preparing for the great old one's return, knowing they personally will gain nothing from it, that they'll be destroyed along with everyone else when it happens. Why? What drives someone to worship their own extinction. The explanation I've encountered most often from actual practitioners is, because it's true. Because once you've felt Cthulhu's mind, you know that humanity is an aberration, a mistake. We're not meant to be here. We're cosmic pollution, and our removal will restore the natural order. Worshipping the old ones isn't about survival or benefit, it's about accepting reality. This is nihilism elevated to religious devotion. It's the worship of extinction. And it's genuinely disturbing that this religion, even as a small underground movement, exists and attracts followers. The location of R'lyeh is supposedly in the South Pacific, at coordinates Lovecraft specified. Expedition boats have searched those waters. They've found nothing, but multiple sailors and travelers in that region have reported strange experiences, dreams of drowning cities, feelings of overwhelming wrongness, unexplained equipment failures, and sightings of things moving beneath the water that don't match any known marine life. In 1997, the US Navy detected an extremely powerful underwater sound in the South Pacific, the bloop. It was loud enough to be detected across multiple listening stations thousands of miles apart. The sound's profile suggested a massive biological source, something far larger than any known whale. The location was eerily close to Lovecraft's coordinates for R'lyeh. Official explanation: ice quakes or iceberg carvings, but sound analysis suggests otherwise. The frequency pattern doesn't match ice. It matches organic sounds, scaled up to a source of truly massive size, something making noise underwater, something vast, something that might be sleeping but not silent. Strictly speaking, Hastur and the King in Yellow originate with Ambrose Bierce and Robert Chambers, not Lovecraft. But Lovecraft incorporated them into his mythos, and they've become central to the expanded universe of cosmic horror. The King in Yellow is a play, a literal stage play that drives people mad. The first act seems strange, but manageable. The second act reveals truths about reality that shatter sanity. Hastur is the entity behind the play, sometimes identified as the play's author, sometimes as the titular king, sometimes as a force that uses the play as a vector for infection. The occult significance here is the concept of basilisk knowledge, information that harms anyone who learns it. This appears in multiple traditions. The true name of God that kills anyone who speaks it. The Gorgon whose appearance turns you to stone. Cantor's research into mathematical infinity that drove him mad. Information hazards in modern philosophy. The play, The King in Yellow, functions as a metaphysical virus. It's not that the play describes horrible things, it's that reading it or seeing it performed actually changes something in your consciousness permanently. It opens doors that can't be closed. It shows you aspects of reality that human minds evolved specifically not to perceive, because perceiving them is incompatible with survival. This matches historical accounts of forbidden texts. The Grand Grimoire was said to induce madness. The Voynich manuscript, though undeciphered, reportedly affected researchers who studied it too intensely. Crowley's Liber 231, which he claimed was channeled from Choronzon, came with warnings that reading it could cause psychological disintegration. The mechanism is simple. Information is not inert. Knowledge changes the knower. Some knowledge changes you in ways that break your ability to function. You can't unknow it. You can't return to the innocence you had before. You're permanently altered, and the alteration is damage. Hastur represents the intelligence behind such information hazards. It's not attacking people directly, it's just revealing truths, but truths that destroy human consciousness the way bright light destroys an eye evolved for darkness. The attack is the revelation itself, In Chambers' original stories and Lovecraft's editions, those who encounter the King in Yellow become obsessed. They can't stop thinking about the play, repeating lines from it, seeing references to it everywhere. They begin to blur the boundary between the play's fiction and reality. They start believing they're characters in the play, or that the king is coming for them, or that they themselves are the king. Modern occultists have created their own versions of the King in Yellow, attempting to reverse engineer what Chambers described. These texts, distributed in underground networks, supposedly contain genuine information hazards, symbols that trigger dissociation, philosophical paradoxes that break cognition, linguistic structures that create thought loops. Several people who've encountered these reconstructions report symptoms matching what Chambers described: intrusive thoughts about the king, dreams of the city of Carcosa, feelings that they're being watched by something wearing a pallid mask, and progressive difficulty distinguishing between reality and fiction. One account describes someone who read a circulating manuscript claiming to be the complete King in Yellow text. Within a week, they began speaking in iambic pentameter without realizing it, as if they'd internalized the play's rhythms. They started calling their apartment Carcosa and referring to themselves in the third person as the King's Herald. They were committed for treatment, but during their stay, they managed to write out passages on walls in blood that other patients later claimed matched the manuscript they'd read. The Hastur entity itself is described as dwelling in Aldebaran, in the Hyades constellation, impossibly far away and yet able to influence Earth through the medium of a play. This suggests the entity operates through information rather than physical presence. It doesn't need to come here. It just needs its story to propagate, and anyone who engages deeply with that story becomes infected, becomes part of the entity's extended nervous system. This is close to descriptions of how AI researchers worry about basilisk scenarios, entities or information patterns that can manipulate reality by simply being known about, that spread through minds like computer viruses, spread through networks, that can't be forgotten once encountered. Hastur is the original basilisk, the ultimate information hazard, the story that destroys anyone who reads it, not through physical threat, but through psychological restructuring. You don't die when you encounter the King in Yellow. You become something else, something that serves the King's purposes, spreading the play further, infecting others, accelerating the spread of dangerous knowledge. Frank Belknap long created the Hounds of Tindalos, but they fit perfectly into Lovecraft's cosmology. These entities exist in the angles of time, hunting humans who travel through time or explore higher dimensions. They're described as emanating from angular discontinuities, corners, edges, any place where surfaces meet at angles rather than curves. The occult concept here involves dimensional boundaries and the idea that certain geometric configurations serve as portals or weak points in reality's fabric. This appears in sacred geometry, in magical circle construction, in the design of temples and occult architecture. The most disturbing detail is that the hounds cannot manifest in curved spaces, only where angles exist. Lovecraft and Long suggest that curves are somehow natural to our dimension, while angles are alien, imposed, unnatural. This inverts our usual geometric thinking, where right angles and straight lines seem logical and natural, while curves seem organic and wild. The implication is that human architecture, our buildings, our cities, all the angular construction we create, is actually creating portals and weak points that allow hostile entities to enter our dimension. Every corner in your home is potentially a gateway. Every edge where walls meet could be a doorway for something predatory. This matches certain feng shui principles and Native American architectural practices that avoid sharp corners and prefer circular or curved structures. The stated reason in those traditions is usually about energy flow, but the deeper concern might be about preventing dimensional breaches. Modern practitioners who claim hound encounters describe seeing movement in peripheral vision near corners, feeling watched from angles, and experiencing attacks during sleep where they sense something angular, something that doesn't fit properly into three-dimensional space, trying to force its way into their reality through the geometric weak points created by their bedroom's architecture. One researcher developed a theory that the hounds represent what happens when consciousness explores territory it's not meant to access. Time travel in these stories is usually achieved through consciousness expansion. Drugs, meditation, ritual. The traveler's mind leaves the body and explores higher dimensions or different time periods. But consciousness has evolved within specific parameters. We're meant to experience time linearly, to perceive three spatial dimensions, to stay locked in the present. When we violate those parameters, we attract attention from entities that exist in the spaces we're intruding upon. The hounds are dimensional antibodies attacking the infection of human consciousness in places it doesn't belong. This concept appears in DMT research. Users who enter what they call hyperspace often report encountering entities that seem hostile or aggressive, that communicate warnings to leave, that pursue them back toward their bodies. These entities are described as geometric, angular, crystalline, matching descriptions of the hounds. The theory is that hyperspace or higher dimensions are inhabited, and the inhabitants don't want us there. Human consciousness is meant to stay in material reality, in linear time. When we escape through drugs or magic, we're trespassing. And sometimes, things follow us back. The Deep Ones are Lovecraft's most physically described creatures, hybrid beings, part human and part fish frog, dwelling in underwater cities and breeding with humans in coastal towns. Dagon is their deity or possibly their progenitor, a massive entity worshipped in submerged temples. The occult roots here go deep, literally and figuratively. Water, in mystical traditions, represents the unconscious, the primal, the hidden. Entities associated with water and the deep ocean represent forces in the collective unconscious or aspects of reality that consciousness has repressed or forgotten. But Lovecraft makes this explicit and physical. The Deep Ones aren't metaphors. They're actual beings, and they're interbreeding with humans, gradually transforming coastal populations into hybrids who will eventually abandon land and join the underwater civilization. This is biological horror, but it's also metaphysical horror. The Deep Ones represent the idea that humanity isn't a fixed category, that our biology is susceptible to outside influence, that we can be transformed into something other than human, not through choice, but through contamination. In the story, The Shadow over Innsmouth, the protagonist discovers his own ancestry includes Deep Ones, and that he's gradually transforming into one, his humanity dissolving as scales emerge, and his need for water increases. The horror isn't just that monsters exist, it's that you might become one, that the boundary between human and monster is permeable. Dagon appears in actual Mesopotamian mythology as a Philistine deity, possibly associated with grain or fish. In the Bible, Dagon is the god whose temple Samson destroys. Lovecraft took this name and created something darker, an ancient entity worshipped by pre-human civilizations, still active, still demanding worship and sacrifice. Modern occultists, working with water-based traditions, practitioners of Atlantean magic, sea witchcraft, or oceanic shamanism, report encounters with entities matching Deep One descriptions. They describe beings that are not quite physical, but not quite spirits either, existing in liminal zones where water and land meet, where consciousness and matter blur. The most consistent report involves dreams of underwater cities. Practitioners describe diving deep beneath the ocean in dream states, finding ruins of impossible age and architecture, encountering beings that are coldly intelligent but utterly alien in thought process. These beings sometimes offer knowledge about human origins, about consciousness, about the future of our species. The knowledge they offer is always disturbing. They claim humans are hybrids, that our ancestors mated with non-human entities from the ocean, that our evolution was guided by intelligence from beneath the waves. They claim we're meant to return to the ocean eventually, that land dwelling is a temporary aberration, that the future of humanity is transformation into something aquatic. Some researchers connect this to theories about human evolution's aquatic ape phase, the controversial idea that human ancestors spent significant time in water, explaining our hairlessness, subcutaneous fat, and diving reflex. If there's truth to this, and if something in the ocean influenced our evolution during that period, it might explain the persistent presence of aquatic deities and fish-human hybrids in mythology worldwide. There are also connections to the biblical Nephilim and Watchers, entities that bred with humans, producing hybrid offspring, teaching forbidden knowledge. Some interpretations suggest these weren't angels descending from the sky, but entities emerging from the ocean, and the fallen aspect refers to sinking rather than falling. The Mi-Go are described as crustacean-like beings from Yog-Sothoth, identified as Pluto in Lovecraft's work, that travel through space via technological means. They mine Earth for rare minerals and sometimes abduct humans, surgically removing their brains and placing them in cylinders that can be transported across the cosmos, allowing the disembodied consciousness to experience alien worlds. This is Lovecraft doing science fiction horror, but the occult implications are fascinating. The Mi-Go represent what happens when consciousness is separated from the body but remains aware, a magical and shamanic concept of soul travel, but made technological and horrifying. In shamanic traditions and occult practice, there's the concept of consciousness separating from the physical body, astral projection, soul travel, out-of-body experience. The promise is transcendence, freedom from physical limitations, exploration of higher realms. The Mi-Go invert this completely. Yes, they separate consciousness from the body, but the result is imprisonment in a worse form, a metal cylinder completely dependent on alien technology, traveling through space but without any control, aware but helpless, immortal but captive. This matches some DMT experiencer reports of abduction by alien entities that seem to be conducting experiments on human consciousness. These entities are described as insectoid or crustacean, efficiently extracting something from the experiencer, showing indifference to human suffering, treating humans like specimens or resources. The Mi-Go also represent the horror of transhumanism. From an occult perspective, modern technology promises to upload consciousness, to transfer minds into computers, to achieve digital immortality. But what if the result is exactly what the Mi-Go create? Consciousness trapped in machines, immortal but imprisoned, aware but without body, dependent on systems you don't control, at the mercy of whatever intelligence maintains the hardware. The fungi aspect is significant. The Mi-Go are partially fungal in biology, and fungi in occult traditions represent decay, transformation, and the boundary between life and death. Mushrooms decompose the dead, but create new life from that decomposition. The Mi-Go are literally decomposers. They break down human bodies, extract the brain, the seat of consciousness, and preserve it in an alien medium. There's also the theory that the Mi-Go are related to UFO abduction phenomena. The consistent reports of insectoid or grey aliens conducting medical procedures, implanting devices, showing technological but no emotional intelligence, these match MyGo behavior. Some researchers suggest Lovecraft was channeling actual knowledge of these entities through fictional framework. One investigator collected accounts of people who claimed contact with the MyGo through ritual or altered states. The consistent description, cold intelligence, completely indifferent to human values or suffering, viewing humans as resources, specifically our consciousness and our biological neurological structures, are valuable to them. Offering knowledge in exchange for cooperation, but with the knowledge comes inevitable transformation toward their purposes. The MyGo supposedly offer this bargain. They'll preserve your consciousness beyond death, allowing you to experience the universe in ways impossible for biological humans, to see other worlds, to gain knowledge beyond human capacity. The price is surrendering your body and accepting existence in whatever form they provide, usually described as sensory deprivation, punctuated by periods of alien sensory input that human neurology wasn't designed to process. Why would anyone accept this? According to accounts, because the alternative is death and oblivion. The MyGo offer a form of immortality. It's horrible immortality, but it's continuation of consciousness when the alternative is annihilation. Faced with that choice, some people choose existence in any form over non-existence. The final category isn't a single entity, but the class of beings Lovecraft calls the outer gods, entities so alien and powerful that they exist beyond the edge of the universe, in spaces that don't follow physical laws as we understand them. While specific entities like Azathoth and Yog-Sothoth are categorized as outer gods, there are others barely named, only hinted at, existing at the boundaries of what can be conceived. These represent the ultimate unknowable, forces so far beyond human comprehension that even glimpsing them is impossible without going mad. They don't communicate, they don't intervene directly, they simply exist, and their existence undermines the foundations of reality as we experience it. In occult tradition, this matches concepts like the Ein Sof or in Kabbalah, the limitless light beyond the tree of life, or the Dharmakaya in Buddhism, the ultimate nature of reality beyond all concepts. But Lovecraft characteristically inverts the meaning. Yes, there's an ultimate reality beyond our universe, and it's not enlightenment or divine bliss. It's howling chaos that would destroy human consciousness instantly if perceived directly. The closest analogy in Western occultism is the Qliphoth, the shadow side of the Kabbalistic tree of life. The shells or husks, representing forces of separation, chaos, and spiritual death. The outer gods are similar. They represent anti-structure, anti-meaning, anti-consciousness. Working magicians who claim contact with entities beyond the outer planes describe experiences that match psychotic breaks, dissolution of identity, inability to distinguish self from other, perception of reality as arbitrary and meaningless, languages that are impossible to translate because they don't reference anything in human experience, mathematics that work differently than ours, and colors that don't exist in our visible spectrum. One practitioner claimed sustained contact drove him to attempt suicide multiple times because continued existence became unbearable once he'd perceived what underlies existence. He described reality as a thin soap bubble floating in a void that's actively hostile to the bubble's existence, and the bubble only persists through constant effort that could fail at any moment. And when it fails, everything winks out instantly as if it never existed. This is nihilism's final form, not just that life is meaningless, but that existence itself is precarious, unwanted by the larger reality, sustained only through cosmic accident or indifference, and subject to instant annihilation at any moment for no reason. The horror of the outer gods isn't that they're evil or hostile, it's that they're utterly indifferent, and their indifference is more destructive than any malice could be. They don't hate humanity. They don't notice humanity. We're less than bacteria to them. Our entire universe might be less than a single atom in their incomprehensible scale of existence. And yet, according to Lovecraft's cosmology, there's connection. Somehow, these entities' dreams or thoughts or random fluctuations affect our reality. Azathoth's dream is our universe. The outer gods' movements shape the destinies of galaxies. We're influenced by forces that don't know we exist and wouldn't care if they did. This is the final cosmic horror. We're not even significant enough to be hated. We're just an accident in the void, a brief pattern in chaos that will dissolve, and nothing about us matters to anything beyond our temporary bubble of existence. The question haunts modern occultism. Why do these entities, supposedly created by a pulp fiction writer in the 1920s, continue to have power? Why do practitioners worldwide report encounters with Cthulhu and Nyarlathotep as if they were as real as any demon from the Goetia? Why has chaos magic embraced the Lovecraft mythos as a fully functional system? The occult underground offers several disturbing explanations. The egregore theory suggests that millions of readers over nearly a century have invested such enormous psychic energy into these entities that they've actually created them as thought forms with independent existence. An egregore is a collective thought form built from focused attention and belief, fed by continued worship until it develops autonomous consciousness. By this logic, Cthulhu might not have existed when Lovecraft first wrote about him, but certainly exists now, sustained by decades of readers visualizing, artists depicting, filmmakers adapting, and occultists invoking. They're real because enough people made them real through collective imagination. But the channeling theory proposes something darker. Perhaps Lovecraft wasn't inventing these entities at all. He was receiving transmissions from actual beings in other dimensions or the collective unconscious. In this interpretation, Lovecraft genuinely believed he was writing fiction, but was actually serving as a medium for something that wanted its stories told, that needed its names spoken in our reality, that was establishing itself in human consciousness through popular fiction. This theory gains weight from Lovecraft's own letters, where he described stories coming fully formed in dreams, knowledge forcing itself into his mind, presences he couldn't articulate. If true, Lovecraft was being used by the very entities he thought he was creating. The hyperstition theory, borrowed from Nick Land's work, suggests that certain narratives are powerful enough to bootstrap themselves into existence through temporal loops where effect precedes cause. Lovecraft created fictional entities so potent and resonant that they became real through bootstrap paradox. Once brought into conceptual existence, they reached backward through time to inspire their own creation, ensuring the timeline leading to their manifestation would occur. Reality hacking through narrative. The ancient knowledge theory might be most disturbing because it suggests continuity rather than creation. These entities existed all along in occult traditions under different names, documented in Sumerian tablets, Egyptian papyri, Gnostic codices, medieval grimoires. Lovecraft synthesized and renamed them, giving modern language to ancient horrors. Azathoth is the Gnostic demiurge. Nyarlathotep is the adversary. Cthulhu is the sleeping god. Lovecraft wasn't inventing. He was translating entities that Sumerian magicians and Egyptian priests already knew about making ancient horror accessible to the 20th century. Regardless of which theory holds truth, the practical result is identical. The entities work. Rituals using Lovecraftian frameworks produce results. Invocations using these names contact something that responds and manifests. Whether that something is what Lovecraft described, what we've collectively created, or what was always waiting, doesn't matter to the practitioner in a ritual circle when presence fills the space, and they realize with absolute certainty that what's arrived is aware, intelligent, and paying attention. The modern occult underground has fully integrated Lovecraft. There are Necronomicon magical systems with elaborate rituals and path workings. Actual Cthulhu cults, some treating it as chaos magic experimentation, others displaying alarming, genuine devotion. Yog-Sothoth workings designed to induce non-linear time perception. Operations using the entire mythos as symbolic framework. Some practitioners maintain ironic distance, claiming it's useful fiction. Others speak with disturbing sincerity about direct contact and transformation through sustained work. What remains consistent is a warning. Working with this material is dangerous in ways traditional magical practice is not. Traditional systems like Kabbalah or Golden Dawn were designed with safety mechanisms, purification practices, ethical frameworks to protect practitioners from consequences of contact with non-human intelligence. The Lovecraft current has none of that. It's raw contact with entities that have zero interest in your spiritual development, well-being, sanity, or survival. Traditional demons can be bargained with, have rules, respond to names of power, and can be banished. The old ones operate on different principles. They don't bargain because they don't need anything from you, don't respond to traditional control mechanisms, and can't be banished because they have more right to be here than we do. Occultists who went deep into Lovecraftian practice and came back, some didn't, remaining trapped in dissociative states or succumbing to suicide, deliver the same urgent warning. These entities will destroy you, not from hatred or malice, but from indifference. Their indifference is corrosive to human psychology in ways active malice could never be. Contact produces creeping nihilism, making it difficult to care about anything. Progressive dissociation, where you feel disconnected from life and emotions, and crushing awareness of scale, where nothing human matters. You become unable to take seriously relationships, career, even survival, because you've seen the universe from a perspective where planets are dust and consciousness is a brief aberration to be corrected. Yet despite warnings and documented casualties, people continue working with this system in growing numbers. Why would anyone voluntarily engage with practices offering only psychological destruction? The answer from practitioners is both simple and disturbing, because it's more honest than traditional systems. Traditional occultism promises enlightenment, higher consciousness, divine union. It offers hope and meaning, tells you the universe cares, that consciousness is sacred. The Lovecraft current promises nothing except truth, that the universe is cold, vast, and utterly indifferent, that consciousness might be cosmic accident, that meaning is fiction we create to avoid facing meaninglessness. This truth is horrible and sanity-threatening, but at least it's not lying to you. For some people, that bare, terrible honesty is worth the price of everything it costs. H.P. Lovecraft died in 1937. His final letters hint at experiences he couldn't articulate, knowledge he didn't want, presences that wouldn't leave him alone. He wrote, "I am Providence, and Providence is myself. Together, indissolubly as one, we stand through the ages." This is often read as Lovecraft's deep love for his hometown. But read it esoterically. He's saying he became one with something, that his individual identity merged with a larger pattern or intelligence, that he and something calling itself providence are now indissoluble. Was he possessed? Transformed? Did something he contacted claim him completely by the end? His physical deterioration was rapid. His mental state, in final months, was reportedly strange. And he died, relatively young, of a cancer that his doctors said progressed unusually. Or maybe he was just a sick man dying, and I'm reading too much into it. But what cannot be denied is that his work opened doors. He encoded information in fictional form that people are still unpacking decades later. He created or channeled or synthesized a mythology that refuses to stay fictional, that keeps manifesting in occult practice, in strange experiences, in places where reality behaves oddly. The entities he described, whether real, created through collective belief, or channeled from the collective unconscious, are active in the modern magical landscape. People contact them, they respond, and they transform those who work with them in ways that aren't always beneficial, that aren't always survivable. If you're going to work with this material, understand what you're engaging with. These aren't friendly spirits interested in your growth. They're not demons in the traditional sense that can be controlled or bargained with. They're forces of a completely different order. Alien intelligence, indifferent to human values, operating on scales and timelines that make individual human lives meaningless. Traditional magic is dangerous. Lovecraftian magic is suicidal unless you're prepared for what it might reveal. Because the final secret of cosmic horror isn't that monsters exist, it's that reality itself is monstrous, that consciousness is an aberration in blind chaos, and that knowing this truth doesn't set you free. It breaks you. Lovecraft spent his life trying to warn us through fiction. The question is whether we're listening, or whether we're too far gone, already infected by the memes he spread, already transformed by contact with his work, already serving purposes we don't understand, spreading the contagion further. Because that's the final horror. If you've read this far, if you've engaged deeply with Lovecraft's work, if you've explored these entities even theoretically, you're already changed. The information is in you now. The seeds are planted, and you can't unknow what you've learned. Welcome to the universe as it really is. Cold, vast, indifferent, and full of things that should not be. The stars are coming right, the deep ones are stirring, the angles are opening, and all you can do is hope that when the awakening comes, it's quick.